When we picture the Middle Ages, we see knights clanging in armor, peasants trudging through the mud, kings brooding in castles. But behind those stone walls, another kind of war was raging, one fought not with swords, but with fabrics, colors, and absurd imagination. Fashion in medieval Europe was a battlefield of pride and status. Every thread whispered who you were, how much you owned, and sometimes how far you'd go just to show it. Clothes weren't just clothes, they were social weapons. And some of them absolutely ridiculous, from straw hats worn by both kings and farmers to shoes so long they had to be chained up just to walk. This was a world where looking good could literally get you arrested. So buckle your belt tight, but not too tight, or it might be illegal, because we're diving into the strangest, most revealing side of the Middle Ages, fashion that ruled, rebelled, and sometimes completely lost its mind. And trust me, the more you hear, the wilder it gets. Let's start with something so innocent it's almost suspicious. The straw hat. You'd think a hat made of straw would belong only to peasants. Wrong. In the medieval world, straw was universal. From dirt-covered farmers to radiant queens, everyone needed shade from the summer sun. But as usual, the rich couldn't resist turning simplicity into spectacle. Noble women turned these humble hats into luxury crowns, weaving pearls into the rims, stitching silk ribbons, and attaching tiny metal badges shaped like flowers or saints. A farmer's hat said, "I work for a living." A noble's hat said, "I'm too rich to need to." By the 13th century, markets were seas of golden straw under the sun, peasants buying practicality, nobles buying prestige, even painters loved them. You can spot straw hats shining like halos in manuscripts, and frescoes from Italy to Flanders. The working class used the straw hat as a rare chance to mimic the elegance of those above, quietly announcing their own sense of refinement. For a brief, beautiful moment, this simple hat united everyone under the same sun, the poor wearing it for shade, the rich wearing it for show. But unity never lasts long in medieval fashion, because what came next wasn't simplicity, it was pure, fashionable chaos. Enter the pew lane, the shoe that turned walking into an extreme sport. By the 14th century, people had gone collectively insane over pointed shoes. Not just a little pointy, we're talking half a meter of leather sticking out like a dagger from your toes. Men tied the tips with little chains so they wouldn't trip on their own vanity. Why? Because the longer the point, the higher your status. If you could barely walk, that meant you definitely didn't have to work. Imagine showing off your wealth by wearing something designed to make you fall on your face. Medieval logic, ladies and gentlemen. King Charles V of France tried to ban these absurd shoes, calling them immoral, unholy, and downright stupid. But even his own courtiers ignored him wearing pew lanes so long they had to stuff them with moss to keep the shape. And of course, the trend spread like wildfire. England, Poland, even Italy joined the madness. Some towns had local laws measuring acceptable shoe length, basically medieval fashion police with rulers. Eventually, the craze literally tripped over itself. People fell, broke bones, and realized maybe footwear shouldn't double as a weapon, but the damage was done. For a few glorious decades, Europe proved one eternal truth. Comfort is temporary, style is forever. And while nobles strutted in their dangerous shoes, the lower classes were plotting a quieter revolution one fought, not with extravagance, but with creativity. You see, in a world where most people owned only 2 or 3 outfits, fashion was a luxury few could afford. But the poor found a loophole: accessories. A new belt buckle, a colorful pouch, or even a polished pair of boots could change how people saw you. Markets became catwalks. Craftsmen sold pewter jewelry, dyed cloth pouches, and brass-tipped belts. People saved for months just to afford one item that whispered, "I know what's in style." Women braided ribbons into their hair or added embroidery to worn sleeves. Men polished their boots and tied their belts in complex knots just to stand out. In those tiny gestures, fashion became rebellion-proof, that elegance didn't belong only to the elite. They used these humble accessories to reflect the latest noble trends, making statements of pride and belonging. If nobles flaunted power, the poor flaunted pride. They borrowed luxury's language and made it their own. And as the rich sneered, the poor smiled, because finally, fashion was speaking their language too. But behind every hat, belt, and pouch, one thing remained: the foundation of medieval fashion, the fabric itself. And that fabric came from one animal that quietly shaped the economy of an entire continent. Meet the true designer of medieval Europe, the sheep. Before silk came from the east or velvet draped over kings, wool ruled everything. Monks wore coarse, undyed habits, nobles wrapped themselves in fine cloaks, and entire kingdoms grew rich trading it. The English wool trade was the beating heart of Europe's economy. Towns like Lincoln and York flourished by exporting fleece to Flemish weavers, who turned it into cloth so soft it felt almost royal. Without sheep, there would have been no English wealth, no Flemish power, no Italian luxury. And don't imagine medieval wool as dull brown rags. Even undyed, it came in natural hues: gray, cream, chestnut, black, a quiet palette that told stories of land and labor. Monks wore gray for humility. Merchants wore fine white for purity and status. Every cloak and robe whispered a story, not of wealth, but of the silent designer grazing in distant fields. Wool was democratic yet deeply symbolic. It clothed sinners and saints alike. It was the quiet fabric that carried Europe through centuries of cold, a reminder that beauty doesn't have to shimmer to be powerful. But not all beauty was humble. Some used color itself as a weapon of authority, and nowhere was that more literal than in the robes of scholars. Imagine walking through 14th century Paris. Among the gray tunics of merchants, one figure stands out, a man in a bright red robe, striding with the confidence of someone who knows he's smarter than you. That's a university doctor. Back then, cities like Paris and Bologna had strict laws dictating academic dress. Physicians and scholars were required to wear red or purple robes, colors of dignity, knowledge, and divine insight. Why red? Because it symbolized life, intellect, and holy purpose. These robes weren't just uniforms, they were visual authority. You could spot a doctor or theologian instantly, glowing crimson among the crowd. The rule had a practical purpose, ensuring citizens instantly recognized a physician during public lectures or crowded streets. And, just to make sure everyone knew their place, green was banned for scholars. That color was reserved for merchants and entertainers, the uneducated. Wearing it as a professor could ruin your credibility faster than a failed lecture, so yes, even science had a dress code. In a time before diplomas and titles, color was your certificate. Medieval academia looked like a festival of blood red and violet velvet, proof that sometimes brains needed bright packaging. But while scholars used color to assert power, others were using it to break the rules entirely. Fashion's next rebellion came in two halves, literally. The My Party style was a wild split outfit, half one color, half another. It began innocently. Servants in noble houses wore their lord's colors, one on each side, as a badge of service. But soon, the look escaped the castle and ran free. Soldiers, musicians, even nobles started wearing double-colored outfits, not out of duty, but for fun. Half red, half blue, half yellow, half black. It was bold, loud, and completely impossible to ignore. In courts across Burgundy and France, this mixing of shocking color pairs symbolized confidence and taste. Conservative priests called it sinful, a reflection of a divided soul. Naturally, that only made it more popular. Court jesters turned it into their trademark, dancing between colors and classes alike. What began as obedience transformed into rebellion. The message was simple: I'm not loyal to one master. I'm loyal to myself. Color, for the first time, became freedom. But while one trend shouted rebellion, another whispered reverence clothing that carried not ego, but memory. In a world obsessed with ancestry, heirloom fashion was the ultimate status symbol. During coronations or grand feasts, nobles often wore garments made decades earlier, sometimes centuries. These weren't outdated, they were sacred. A duke might wear his grandfather's fur cloak. A queen might don a crown designed generations before. Wearing old-fashioned was wearing history. It said, I come from a line too great to forget. Tailors restored these relics with new fabrics and stitches, blending past and present into one story. Some noble families kept entire wardrobes of heirloom clothing, each tagged with the name of its original wearer, a museum you could wear. In the Middle Ages, when your castle might crumble or your name be erased by war, fashion preserved legacy better than stone. It was history sewn into the body. Every stitch was a whisper from the past, reminding its wearer that beauty could preserve memory better than stone. And when vanity grew too heavy to bear, there was only one place to lay it down: the church. After feasts and tournaments, nobles were drowning in luxury. Silks, velvets, brocades, all worn once and too holy or too expensive to throw away. So they performed an act of redemption donation. They gifted their finest garments to monasteries, where monks cut and re-sewed them into priestly vestments. The same golden cloth that once shimmered at royal banquets now draped over altars. It was the perfect medieval transaction trading vanity for virtue. The rich hoped to wash away sin by wrapping holiness in their leftovers. And ironically, it worked. The church became one of Europe's largest collectors of fashion. Many medieval vestments displayed in museums today started life as party clothes for nobles. The same velvet that caught torchlight in castles later caught candlelight in cathedrals, a strange, poetic balance between sin and salvation. This cycle of wearing, repenting, and reusing created a strange harmony between faith and fashion. But not every innovation in medieval fashion was about excess. Some were centuries ahead of their time, sleek, practical, and shockingly modern. Welcome to 15th century Italy, where the Renaissance began and the calze were born. Think of them as medieval sneakers, soft hose made entirely of fabric, with thin leather soles sewn underneath. They hugged the legs tightly, showing off muscle and grace. In Florence and Venice, elegance meant restraint. No giant hats, no heavy boots, just smooth lines and silent steps. Men strutted in silk or fine wool hose, perfectly fitted, turning comfort into luxury. In art, scholars and poets appear gliding through marble halls in their calze, a symbol of intellect, dressed in simplicity. It was fashion stripped down to its essence, beautiful not because it shouted, but because it whispered. The calze reflected the Italian genius for beauty through restraint, proving that innovation could come from the courage to simplify. But the calm didn't last. Because, of course, fashion always finds a way to go from graceful to scandalous. By the late 15th century, things got cheeky. Literally. Men's tunics grew shorter and tighter until they barely covered the hips, revealing hose stretched over their legs and sometimes their backsides. It was bold, daring, and for the upper class, completely legal. For everyone else, not so much. In 1463, England passed a law forbidding commoners from wearing garments so short they exposed their buttocks. Apparently, showing too much thigh was a privilege reserved for nobles. Paintings from this era look almost comical now, princes and courtiers posing proudly in their micro-tunics, chests puffed out, legs gleaming. The church called it indecent. The people called it progress. Tailors, of course, just kept cutting fabric shorter. And so the Middle Ages ended the same way they lived, in a fight between vanity and virtue, between rules and rebellion. Fashion in the medieval world was never just about beauty. It was about identity, power, and survival. Fashion in the medieval world was never just about beauty. It was about identity, power, and survival. Every fabric told a story. Every color carried a message. Every absurd law revealed how deeply people cared about how they looked. Because even in an age of war, plague, and faith, humans still fought to express themselves through rags, ribbons, and ridiculous shoes. They didn't just wear clothes, they wore meaning. And maybe that's the real elegance of the Middle Ages, that in a dark and dangerous world, people still cared to look beautiful. If you enjoyed unraveling the hidden codes of medieval fashion, hit like and subscribe, because next time, we're opening the wardrobe of medieval royalty. And trust me, some of those crowns came with secrets you wouldn't believe.
You are more beautiful than any queen, my love.